first things, somebody's already in the chat saying that we're releasing builds. Oh, Jen, what's up?
Hi.
How's it going? Thanks for being on time. Hey, you brought treats, so it's okay. I will totally forgive.
Oh, wow.
What is this goodness? Oh my goodness! I'm actually gonna have to eat on camera. What is this? You gotta tell me what this is, because this looks delicious.
So, these ones are Boston cream, and these ones are dark chocolate and orange.
Okay, this is way fancier than anything that I can bake. And so, what is this in celebration of, ma'am?
10-year anniversary.
Congratulations! Nicely done. That is awesome. Yeah, I'm past that halfway point, but I am not there yet. Sweet. So, Brandon, what you got? Anything? Nothing? Okay. So, while I'm waiting for some information from Brandon, let's talk about why we are here today, besides just to hang out with all of you cool folks, because we love you guys. Oh, it is? Oh, we're finally... Oh, okay. So, I got a little something. Today, we are going to be talking about build servicing. So, we'll talk a little bit about flighting. We will talk about build servicing. And as you can imagine, we wouldn't talk about flighting and servicing without doing something super awesome. So, let's talk about builds. If you have not, as of yet, check for builds on your machines if you are in the fast and slow rings, because yes, we are launching builds today. The taco hat can release the button. And if you were wondering why this button doesn't match the usual red button, it's because...
Did you just pick this up at Staples?
Staples doesn't exist anymore. Like, this is like retro, nostalgia now.
Staples does exist. There's one in Redmond. I went to...
Oh, never mind.
But they don't make the easy
Yeah, they don't
button
sell the
anymore.
easy button, sorry. Yeah.
They've changed their slogan.
Yeah, so Gabe just came back from sabbatical, so I didn't want to go bug him and steal the red button out of his office. So I substituted this red button that I've had for 2005, so 13 years now.
That was easy.
Yes, so it actually still works. The builds are launched, what is it, 750, what is the one in the slow ring? 58.1004 is in the slow ring, and then 17.763 is in the fast ring. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. So the joy of multitasking. I'm sending the tweet. There we go. So the tweet from the insider account has just been sent live on this webcast. There you go. So 2 new builds to play with. One in the fast, one in the slow. If you're on skip ahead, nothing for you today, unfortunately, but there's always something in the works. So I'll just leave it at that. So anyway, there's an introduction slide that I will get to eventually. So how about while I'm fiddling with this, we just do introductions and go around the room. So I'm Jason. You've seen me a million times. North Face Hiker on Twitter. Hi. Brandon.
I'm Brandon.
And it actually works too. Like,
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
that's just...
How much that cost?
Probably not.
You don't want to know. I'm Brandon. You know me. I'm not going to really go into this.
William, you've probably seen me around on the forums and Twitter and stuff like that by now. So, have everyone.
I just accidentally erased half the universe.
I'm Jen. I don't know if you can hear me from back there, so I'll just wait.
I'm Malia. I work on Windows Update.
Hi, I'm Joel. I also work on Windows Update.
Josh. I've been on a couple webcasts now. I work on the flighting system and how we send builds out to insiders.
Awesome. I think I have it set so it's actually going to work. Let's see here. Hooray! Let's switch back to this. Okay, so now I had to change what I'm doing in the room a little bit. Normally I have it on the laptop and then I present up on the screen as well so everybody can see a little easier. If you need to, just pop open the presentation on your laptops. Sorry. Something fun I was trying that apparently is not going to work properly. So we did some builds. We've done some introductions. So Josh, Malia, Joel, welcome aboard. And then Jen, everybody did their introductions. All right, so real quick, let's talk about the life of a build. And so we've seen this development life cycle before, where you start off, we got release planning, drops, over to engineering systems where the builds get created. Then we actually go into flighting, which is where insiders get involved. Deployment is when they show up on your machine. Build use and testing, obviously the fun part of being an insider. And not to mention the feedback side of things, which is the crux of the program. And then, of course, there's the future cycle for development and current cycle, which was RS5 for right now, the future cycle being 19H1 for those of you in skip ahead. But, of course, as we talked about a few webcasts ago, we can't forget the joys of developers and the actual development of Windows, which alters this graph a little bit. But today, what we're going to focus on between talking about the slow ring and then the servicing side of things really falls within this bucket right here, which is the loop between feedback that we receive from insiders, the actual work of developers within the current development cycle, and then of course, engineering systems gets involved as code gets checked in and new builds get created. So let's talk about the flight rings real quick. You've seen this slide before, hopefully, and for those of you that are new to this, here's a visual representation of how we flight. Starts off in Canary, then we drop out to self-host, both of these being internal rings. Then, of course, we head over to the fast ring, which is the first taste that insiders get of a build externally. We also have the internal Microsoft ring, and then we have the slow ring and release preview, which is always the current retail builds, plus the monthly cumulative updates. And then last but not least, there's this.
Totally not me.
We have the skip ahead ring that drops off of, and there wasn't a good way to circle it, so it's kind of Canary and self-host, and then into skip ahead, which is always the next level of development. So 19H1 currently, we try to release builds to skip ahead once a week. Every now and then there's some fun stuff that happens in there because it's this skip ahead ring, and so we may have to skip a week or two there, which we actually have a couple weeks ago. So, and don't worry, everybody skip ahead. We always hear the, hey, where's my build stuff? So don't worry, we're always listening to that. So next up, I'm gonna turn it over to Josh, so we can talk about some changes that are happening in the flighting side of things.
Yeah.
Here, I will pass you the baton, sir. The fancy baton. Just click right.
Okay. So there hasn't been a ton of groundbreaking changes in flighting in the last year, which is actually a good thing. It means that we have our feet under us and things are kind of running pretty smoothly. Oh, nice. I can actually see what I'm talking about now. A couple things that we have done, though, at least that have made my team's life easier, are we created a new tool that lets us manage the bugs that come through a little better. So these bugs come from feedback that the insiders give, automated telemetry sources like Watson and that sort of stuff. Feature teams can, we're self-hosting here internally all the time, so we go find these bugs. And there's a lot of complications when you have all these different self-host fronts running the build and finding issues and trying to report them. So how do you actually aggregate that together, take a look at those every day when we meet in flight ops, and sort of analyze what the impact of those will be on insiders. So we created a little dashboard that lets us manage that process a little better and make sure that we're actually seeing the feedback that insiders are giving us and considering whether we can continue pushing a flight out through the rings that Jason just showed on the screen a couple slides ago. So that's at least made my life a lot easier. Second thing is also a very internal thing, but we're at a point now where the button pusher, not this button here, the Staples button, but the real button. The role and the tools are refined enough now that we can actually rotate this role around the team. So, this is the role that way back in the day Gabe used to have, and then it's sort of transitioned along the way. Now it's something that most people can just hop into. You spend a month getting your feet wet, and you're really the one who's looking at the quality of the build every day, and sort of managing all the different verticals that we look at that we've shown you guys before in the data views that we have. And it's nice being able to rotate that every single month, and that way if someone switches teams or I'll be at Ignite next week, for example.
Somebody's on vacation, somebody gets
someone
sick.
on vacation, we've got other people that can come in and fulfill that role. And then lastly is the real big thing, which is why what the main topic here is today, which is that we're trying to make sure that we get to slow on a very regular cadence. And so Joel and his team and it's Woo, WC, a bunch of internal teams here at Microsoft have partnered with the flighting side of the world, and we're still learning, but we've spun up this effort to make sure that we're getting those builds out to you guys regularly who are in the slow ring. So that's the biggest change that's happened in the last year. There's been a lot of learning so far. We're testing out new tools and standing up new processes and all that sort of stuff. And that's probably the biggest thing that we're working on right now in terms of flighting. I have the clicker. I was waiting for you to change
No,
it.
it's you. And you mentioned like the cadence of slow builds, Brandon. I'm going to put you on the spot here. How many slow builds did we release in RS4 from the April 2018 update? Was it like 3?
It was
4? It wasn't very many.
Very small.
Yeah, and I mean that number right there. Given that normally we try to flight at least monthly to slow, our longer term goal I think is every 2 weeks hopefully. That's kind of a this is where we would like to get future anticipated type state. But
we've actually technically did 7 RS4,
and a bunch of them were right at the end, right?
The cadence
Improved towards the end of the
Toward the
development
end,
cycle.
yeah.
Yeah, it tends to improve as the
Yeah.
quality goes up, right? And as we're starting to get closer to that release date, what we're trying to do now is, even in the beginning stages, make sure that we have some mechanisms to stabilize that build so that we can send it to slow right away. This is a high-level infographic of what I'm talking about here. On the left-hand side, we have some fast build that we've sent out, and it's got these blocking issues that are our quality bar to go to slow is much higher. It's preventing us from going to slow. So what we do is we take fixes for those specific bugs, and Joel and Malia will go over this later, the actual process for how we do this, but we turn those into a cumulative update, and then we can apply that on the right-hand side at the same time as the fast build. We can send you latest build that went fast with the fixes for the bugs that would be blocking us from going to slow. And we'll dig a little deeper into that today, but that's a super high-level view of what we're talking about here. So how do we actually kind of go through this process and determine what we want to send to slow and what those fixes are going to be? So very early on, we actually sit down and build the schedule of what we want to do for the next few months during development, when we want to go to fast, when we want to go to slow, etc. Then, as anybody that's been on previous webcasts probably knows, we look at the quality of those flights on a daily basis, and we specifically for this topic look at what's in fast today. There's a bunch of bugs, hopefully not, but there's usually some bugs that come in. We use that tool I was mentioning earlier to go triage those, and then we try to get those fixes in. So we send off anything that we've approved for slow blocking to the feature teams to get that fixed. And like I said earlier, we send those things together. So digging into that a little bit, here's an example schedule of last release, something we might sit down and come up with together as a partnership amongst our teams. So it's really dependent on when we want to go to fast, when the security patches, so those patch Tuesdays that everybody in the world's familiar with, go out, our flights to fast. We take other things into consideration here, holidays, release dates, big events that we want to sort of cater towards, things like that, and we try to build some sort of roadmap out very early on.
And that's actually something that I don't think we've ever talked about before. And I don't want to drag it into a long conversation, but it is an important point to make. that for the the security fixes and the patches and things like that that do go out to the retail builds, insider builds get these as well. It's not like, oh, hey, we're just shipping it to current retail clients and insiders stay unpatched. Like, this gets put into the builds. The same code that all the retail users and enterprises across the planet are getting, insiders are getting it as well. We time them super closely, so there's not like some month-long gap or anything. The exact timing is kind of a trade secret, so I'm not going to talk about that specifically. But insiders do stay. They stay patched. They stay secure. They stay up to date. I want to highlight that point because we've never actually mentioned it.
For us, especially slow ring, which tends to stay on a build for 2 to 4 weeks. We really want to make sure those devices are sitting on builds with the latest security updates.
Yep.
So we want to make sure we have some mechanism to get those out, and when we're planning that.
In fact, next release cadence schedule that we just built, that John just showed, we have that already built.
Yeah.
And it's built now, so we can tell you when we're aspiring to be able to deliver.
We probably won't, but
Yeah. Get your slide back. There you go.
Okay. We've shown this slide before. I think actually my lead, Amanda, maybe talked to this probably a year ago.
It has actually been exactly 1 year. The September webcast from last year, which I think we're within a day or two of when we did it a year ago. This was one of the slides that was in that original presentation. You'll notice the old build numbers. So there's no super secret information on here. You're not getting
nothing you can glean out of this. I did that on purpose. But yeah, this is our bread and butter tool that we look at on a daily basis to evaluate the quality of the build. It shows us things like adoption trends, and we can actually slice and dice the flight that's out there by verticals and look at the quality and all that sort of stuff, and that helps give us an idea of if this build is a high enough quality to send all the way out to the slow ring. Same thing here. I kind of removed a bunch of anything that could be disclosure, but the bottom part here is where when I'm running that daily meeting, I'm going to be able to go see anything that people have brought up, insiders have brought up, internal self-hosting, anything like that, and said, hey, this is an issue that we need to address. And there's buttons I can go in here and click and all sorts of magic and say, yeah, I totally agree. We should block this or this issue blocks this flight from going to the slow ring. And this gives me that high level view of what's currently blocking, the fixes that we need to get into our servicing pipeline, and kind of the ability to manage that on a week-to-week basis.
And so just for those of you, obviously, because there is some, editing that was done to this, kind of, had some specific information. The white grid to the right where it talks about blocking fast and slow and whatnot, like builds that are good enough to go to fast but not slow, it'll show up as green and red, kind of what you see in the, kind of like the legend over on the left side. Because there are times where we know that a bug that may go to fast would be blocking for slow because of the different ring criteria that exist. So we'll actually push some builds to fast knowing that they won't go to slow.
Totally.
Like that absolutely happens.
Yeah. What else did I have? Yeah. So on that previous page, I can go and I can mark those bugs and notify the teams, hey, this is something we want to get fixed quickly so that we can send this flight out to from the fast ring to the slow ring. We actually give the teams a pretty short amount of time. So any of you that are out there that are developers probably know that if someone comes to you and says, hey, this is a bug and we need to get it fixed, it's usually you don't know how long it's going to take because you need to go understand what the issue is. We have a pretty short window here of 3 to 5 days to get that issue fixed and checked into our stabilization branch so that we can actually go to slow. The fast builds just churn so quickly. We send a new one, every week, sometimes twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to get those fixes in and actually check everything in just the way the code moves in this gigantic Windows code base, that's how quickly we need to get those in. So we do that, we get the fixes in, and then we actually do another round of internal self-host on the build with the fixes to make sure that everything works. So the feature teams are asked to go validate the build with the LCU. Some of the folks in this room actually go ahead and download and install it and plink around on it and make sure that everything's working, and then you're going to see it start to make its way into the slow ring. The build we sent today, that 1004 build, that went through that exact process. I think there's one more slide.
All right. Let's get you back over.
Yeah, and I'll let the people who are more familiar with the technical side of this talk to this later, but we package those up, we send those things together, the fixes and the feature update. The cool thing about this is we actually use the same delivery mechanisms, pipelines, and tools that we use when we release our major releases of Windows. And so that gives us an immense amount of value to validate that pipeline as early as possible, so that when we go out to the world, we have confidence in our system and that we've uncovered any bugs and got those addressed super early in the development cycle. I think that's it for me.
Yeah, this one's mine. So just one slide here, because I want to briefly talk about the servicing model, right? And so there's some questions I'm going to throw out there. I'm going to throw it out to Leah and Joel, as well as some questions that I got asked ahead of time once Insiders. I kind of told them, hey, this is the webcast we're going to be doing. So I kind of took in some pre-read type questions, so to speak. So a few things, what determines if a bug can actually be serviced, right? Is it better to service for a bug or just to fix it in a new build? How is applicability determined for a servicing package when your device is actually scanning for updates? And then, of course, how is the servicing package actually dropped down to a device? Is it one build downloads and then it comes in behind, or they sim shipped? Like, kind of some of the technical mechanism behind it, right? So, I'm telling you, this is why I love asking Insiders for these types of questions, because, well,
I've asked many of these questions.
I mean, it's good stuff. Some of it's just kind of like the mechanism of how we do code, right? And some of it's the delivery mechanism. So, I don't want to put you on the spot and be like, answer these questions right now.
Talk about them. Let's talk about them, and then we can go back and catch up some of the things.
Okay.
So, what determines if a bug can be serviced? In almost all cases, any bug can be serviced. It's what we have is, because we're moving so much code through so fast, and we're bringing different teams' code together. What you end up having is a lot of the bugs that we end up surfacing by the time it gets to Insiders are typically integration bugs.
Okay.
And so what happens is when you have an integration bug, you have a couple of options. Any developer or any large project will be able to tell you this, is that either we got to go isolate a particular team to fix it, which might not necessarily be how the long-term fix gets done.
Sure.
Or we back code out to be able to isolate the issue so that we don't have the issue.
Okay.
So what happens is there are particular bugs that can't be serviced, and this gets into things around like blueprints and frameworks if we make a change at the high level. There are other things. The other thing that you have to remember is where the bug needs to get fixed.
Yeah.
So we always have a situation with like if it's an edge bug, typically we can isolate and have edge fix it. If you have an issue where you have a bug, the typical time where we say, hey, a bug cannot be serviced is if the bug affects the servicing stack itself.
Okay.
So if you have the ability to, as long as we can continue to update people, we can take as many bugs as we want to be able to go there. If we break the ability to update people,
then we got a problem. Yeah.
Then we got a problem, and then we have to go into, we have a bunch of ways to fix it, but that's where we bring into, okay, really, that would be a servicing bug that we couldn't service.
Yeah, and then there's that extra layer of what's like up level versus down level, and where the bug actually exists. And
From a flighting perspective, that's not as relevant. But in our servicing world, what'll happen is since we're going across multiple branches, RS3, RS4, RS2, RS1, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows Server, ARM64. You have all these different variables that affect issues. And so what we have to do is be able to go and say, okay, if we have a bug, we have to go fix it in all these different places, and obviously the code is different in some of the
Sure.
all these different branches. So the ability to fix it sometimes is predicated on how the code base that it's in.
Okay.
Is it better to service for a bug or simply fix in a newer build? The question there is, this is actually probably more relevant to the branch you're in.
Okay.
So in Webcast, and I'll talk more about this in a few slides. In a Webcast environment, the idea is we want to get payload testing done on the payload itself, and speed is of the utmost importance. And the expectation is that we might have issues that aren't as high a quality as we would normally like, but we want feedback on that.
Sure.
So in those cases where we're trying to get speed, hey, it's easier to fix a newer build. As we start to get closer to the end, as we start to get more stable on the actual OS, we want to be able to service the bug to validate all the different scenarios that end customers, our billion customers have, we'll be able to address it. So it somewhat depends on which ring, what the problem is, and where we are in the life cycle.
Okay.
How is applicability determined for service pack and scanning for updates? This is actually an interesting question, and it's probably worth driving into how updates work in general. But at a very high level, you build a payload, and the composition of the payload can result in where it gets delivered. So there are a couple of things going on. One is we build a type of payload, like a cumulative update, or a dynamic update, or it could be a feature on demand update, or it could be a language pack update, where all these things get there. But I mentioned earlier about servicing stack. If the servicing stack has an issue, we have to build a different type of payload for that.
Okay.
If the device is getting updated from setup or how they're getting updated, if we have an update that pulls that off of the network, then you have to be able to go and say, okay, how do you solve it there? The other one that we end up dealing with a lot of times is the enterprise environments. If the issue has to be addressed over WSUS or SCCM or third-party device management system, how do we be able to deliver that and compose it and manage it? So what happens is we build the payload with the composition to the appropriate delivery mechanism.
Okay.
And in updates, what we do is we take the fixes in and we pull all the binaries, change binaries, and we put it up onto our Windows Update service. The Windows Update service then targets. And I'll talk later in this about rollouts and targeting.
Sure.
But at the high level, the very high level, targeting is around every time the device scans, it says, which OS are you on? Do we have anything new for you? And the targeting, is it relevant to your device, area, locale, region? There's a whole bunch of variables that we use. Then once it gets pulled down, the payload itself has applicability rules on the binaries at the binary level. So what will end up happening is a payload will come down, and if your device doesn't have those binaries, it gets ignored. If it has those binaries, it'll install the fix. Now I'm doing a super broad generalization.
Sure.
And a lot of the optimizations, some of the things that Malia is going to talk about, are optimizing the whole process so that we only build the proper binaries. Only the binaries that go to your device would get pulled down, and minimize productivity. So that's what we're playing this game around. And literally, it's a very complex game around how do we optimize the delivery so that we minimize users' impact to the individual level, users' productivity impact. I don't want to break anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what's the minimum stuff we can send to them that requires the least amount of offline time or user interruption? That way, we're not chewing up their bandwidth. We're not keeping them in a unusable state for their machine too long. All that kind of stuff.
You take our one of our top priorities for the next year continues to be is how do we make the user experience so non-impactful that it's a non-event.
Yeah.
So something as simple as hey, if you're doing a presentation in front of a large audience, I don't want the Windows Update logo to come up, or the machine to reboot, or anything to be noticeable.
Yeah.
And you take that scenario very far. You can say, hey, I don't want kiosk machines to be sitting there with Windows needs to be rebooted.
Sure.
I don't want high availability devices taking updates.
Yeah.
And then the other one that we're getting into a lot of is as more and more go into the cloud, you have a whole update issue related to cloud. So hey, if you have a VM in Azure Gallery, for instance, I don't want to break that, and I want to deal with that in an appropriate way. Mm-hmm. So these are all the problems that we think about, and how do we service and how do we get the right payload and totally minimize the user impact.
Yeah, and just to make a kind of a tacked on point to that, last year, I think it was last June, so a little over a year ago, we did an entire webcast about deployment, and at that time, this what we just lovingly called Neo, right? The whole where upgrades are kind of like a non-event for end users. It was partially underway at that point. There had been a lot of work done. It hadn't necessarily showed up in builds. But one of the things that hopefully every single one of you watching this taking Insider Builds has seen at some point is, and we have talked about it on the webcast, is the split between what the machine is doing while you're in your online phase. So it unpacking the WIM, laying down as much of the OS as possible, so that when you do take that reboot that brings you into that offline phase where you got the spinning dots and it's the blue screen and you see all the percentages counting. That's the offline phase, so that is minimized. And so one of the things that we keep hearing, both between feedback coming in from the Feedback Hub, we hear it on Twitter, we've heard it on the Answers Forum, we've seen tech articles written about it, is the reduction in overall time between, hey, my build finished downloading and I am sitting at my desktop waiting to log in again. That overall time has been reduced, as well as the changes that have occurred to push some of that process into the online phase so that users can keep using their machine. That way, when they do take the reboot for the part that is, still required to be in that offline unusable phase, that period is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And we've heard reports, depending on machine speed and type and everything like that, anywhere from some users are, they're completing the offline phase in 8, 10, 12 minutes. Some users are doing it in 30 minutes on older machines. And while 30 minutes sounds like a long time, given that telemetry has shown us that some of those old machines were taking an hour and a half to take their updates. So when you start talking about the scale of reduction that has occurred in, user impact, we're doing some pretty cool things around here. And so it happens both on the deployment front as well as the work that you're doing on the servicing side as well. It kind of it affects the broad spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
And then, so the last question that was posted up here is on that delivery pipeline side of things, and you talked about some about the applicability, where it gets looked at, how it determines whether or not it needs to go to a machine. Is it just like, it's almost like feeling like I'm trying to stick, 2 pegs in the same hole at the same time. It's like, does it come down separately? Is it slipstream together? Does it come down as one big package? Like, how does that work?
The answer is it depends.
How did I know you were going to say that?
There's an art and a science associated with updates, and that part falls more into the art aspect. Again, our aspirational goal is to be able to provide the precise payload to each device in a minimized from a bandwidth, size, speed, delivery. So what happens is when we create the packages, we have this set of combinations on how what actually gets involved into creating the particular payloads. And then we make the payloads available to the Windows Update Service. The Windows Update Service has targeting infrastructure around it, and then the payloads itself have applicability. So your device pings the Windows Update Service, and it provides a set of information. Here are the attributes of my machine. And so using those attributes, targeting is then addressed to pull down the appropriate payloads. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, what we had to do is we had to create all those payloads, and the payload was specific to what the targeting was.
Oh, wow.
So literally we spent days, weeks, each time managing metadata to be able to determine that the composition of that payload was what we put up there, and basically it was like a library. You pull down a book from the library. Literally, you went to the card catalog, you pull down this, and you got what was in there. And if the book had 20 chapters on something you didn't care about, you got it anyway.
Wow, okay.
So in the technology and stuff that we've worked on around how we create the payload as well as how we deliver it, we've done a lot of optimizations where we can put the different combinations of packages and then be able to pull the specific packages that you need. So like 10 years ago, you would pull down a whole bunch of languages that you necessarily weren't using, or features on demand that you weren't necessarily using. And there's fixes that you get there now. So now our idea is, hey, let's minimize what we can. And there's a whole bunch of really intelligent people trying to solve this problem from many different angles.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that we build on. So in short, what happens is your device pings the service, and we provide the payload down.
Okay. All right. So let's just see here. What is coming up next? Next slide. So this is where we get into shipping service builds. Joel, I'm going to hand you off the clicker and let you run the show.
I'm going to talk a little bit about, I know Josh and Jason, you went in there, and I wanted to go back and say, hey, level set what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And talk about what's being done at these levels. So it's a little bit higher step back from what we just talked about.
Okay.
From a fast ring perspective, the idea is that we get high quality payloads, and it's all about payload validation. And we do them fast, we do them fast, we do them fast. Slow has a couple of important values around it. One is you were able to keep it stable. The analogy I use is my wife at home on our machine has Office and on the monthly cadence, and she's never once said anything to me about Office. Her other than she can't get Excel to work or PowerPoint to work. Or
Sure.
She doesn't know how to do a formula, but those are two different issues. But the reality is I couldn't put her on slow with confidence that she wouldn't run into issues that would break her productivity.
Okay.
And so the idea is that we get slow to the point, like it's just like Office, that we have a steady build that we're confident enough that people that don't lose their productivity, but yet we're getting telemetry and data. And the telemetry and data that we're getting from slow is a little different than the telemetry and data that we're getting from fast. In that, because slow's on there for 3 weeks and a month, you're getting long-term telemetry.
Yeah.
And you're getting things that have been run for a while. Okay, service has been up for days, weeks now. Okay, what happens? What are we seeing? Are we seeing growth issues? Are we seeing memory leak? Those are really important bugs that you'll find only over time. And then release preview is the quality updates of the current branch. So what we do with the release preview is each month for the Patch Tuesday, we have two sets of fixes. We have security fixes, and then we have non-security fixes. So all the non-security fixes get put in about 2 weeks before Patch Tuesday. We push out release preview, which allows us to test the non-security fixes with, and this is super critical, apps and drivers. So this is where the drivers and apps get flighted, and they get a lot of feedback around what the majority of our customers are on the current branch.
Yep.
Testing apps and drivers, and that allows our quality updates, our monthly quality updates, to be able to be delivered with these apps and drivers and get feedback so we don't break anything in theory.
Okay.
Improve quality.
It's super important to draw, just to like tack something onto that. I have my hand in the driver flooding space, and the complexity of drivers and driver flooding, my world was shattered when I learned how ridiculous it is. I think saw an example just the other day. One graphics driver had 193 versions depending on the hardware you were running and OEM model and all that sort of stuff. And we flight thousands of drivers a month and try to get validation of those. So at least preview is super valuable.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about
to see how those play with the OS updates,
like an
and
NVIDIA
servicing updates
1080 graphics card, right? Is it plugged into an Asus motherboard?
Yeah.
Is it plugged into an MSI motherboard?
Yeah.
Is it a Gigabyte motherboard? Is it the list keeps going on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like one video card. And you take a look at NVIDIA and ATI's full Radeon lineup, right? And you start looking, and then over every home-built machine combination of everything, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like looking at graphics card. And there's sound drivers and hard drives and, everything else that you can consider plugging into a computer.
Do a whole webcast on driver flooding.
Yeah.
If you wanted to.
It gets real big real quick.
Yeah. Not to go, I'm going to go a little bit out of sequence here to riff on what you guys are talking about relative to the drivers. The world that we want to get to, and it's going to get there sooner rather than later, is basically taking this telemetry and being able to feed it back into the system to be able to provide applicability. So we're not that far away from a world where I could go to an enterprise customer. My daughter at school uses Surfaces. The whole school uses Surfaces.
Okay.
And they have monthly updates, and one of the things that I'd be able to say to her is, hey, we have millions of people in that exact same configuration with that same exact application setting with all these drivers, and they're taking the updates and they're having no problems.
Yep.
Or, you know what, we don't have enough people. We have a statistically not relevant, but we have a statistical pool of people that have already taken this. And we could basically go to them and say, hey, you know what, we're not quite confident, but we're pretty confident. Or even there's hey, you know what, we have enough people and it's statistically relevant that we know you're going to have problems. There's a driver conflict. There's an app conflict. And you know what, as a person that doesn't want to deal with that, you don't take it. Now, take it right now at a step level, it's we're gathering the information, analyzing it, and being able to put it into machine learning and get the machines to learn. It's not far away from us being able to send it back out to the device. So when the device sends, here's what I've got, great, here's my information. Now, here's, based on our machine learning, what we would say is the optimal update. And so what you start to get into is, and then play it to the enterprise customers. Hey, enterprises, their biggest deal is, I can't have a loss of productivity.
Sure.
I don't want people, times a million people, a million devices, I can't, a minute is a big time loss. Yeah. So how do I go to them and be able to say, how do I not cause productivity loss? Well, I'm 99.999% confident this machine configuration that you have, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, you guys have the ability to take these updates and there's not going to be any problems. Based on your configuration, based on all the machine learning. And that's where we're trying to get to relative to the different rings and the telemetry that we get. So back to the user experience for a second. I'm going to go back to the slides. As a fast user, you're providing us telemetry on the payload. But there's different telemetry and different things that you might not be able to provide that a slow user provides. And Release Preview has even another set of data that is even super valuable. Yeah. So how do we optimize the collection of the data and still maintain a great user experience? And that's where we're aspiring to from a user experience perspective. Fast will always be you're running on the cutting edge, especially skip ahead fast. Boy, that's really cutting edge, and that's great. And then slow and fast in the active branch allow us to be able to get another set of data to be able to create a higher quality experience. So I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to come back to that slide to set it there, about what's what's working, what's not working, and why we are focusing on slow the way we're focusing on it. I talked earlier about how we build updates and we create LCUs. All you guys referred to Whip Slow just took 17758.1004. Actually, I think it's .4.
It's not 1004?
No, the payload itself is .4 because we went to the final
Well, then I
release
better
numbering.
update everything.
So, but that being said, what that payload is literally all the fixes between 17758 and 17760. And way we build updates is we bring all the fixes into our servicing branch. We bring 7758 into the servicing branch. We bring in 17760. We run this super cool tool that goes and says all the binaries that got changed, we're going to go pluck them. We're going to go put them into a quality update. We call an LCU. We deliver the quality update in the LCU, and then we send that out. So this is this particular servicing run is our final, all the final tools, all the changes we made. We moved language packs to the store. We had to be able to support that. There's a bunch of features that came in that we want to be able to support. So our tools test it, and we're excited that this one went pretty flawlessly. The other nice thing that Malia's going to talk about is we did some optimizations around how we create and build LCUs. And so I'm going to highlight the fact that Malia's going to talk more details about this soon. So one of the things that we went to prior to this release, Josh and I and a few others sat down and we said, how do we get long-term coverage, and then how do we get this key customer types? And in this particular case, they're this enterprise customer component and the gamer accessibility. Some of these different tests we want to be able to go validate on a stabler build.
Yeah.
And so, and there are going to be some, and we're going to continue to improve that. One other thing that we hit with this was, all right, Donna's here.
Hi, Donna.
I was gonna say hi.
I escaped my last meeting, just as usual.
Oh, thank you. So anyway, we end up doing, one of the things that we're doing is we did a bunch of server testing. So Windows Server got a lot more validation in the Insider ring. One of the things that we're hoping to bring online, or we're aspiring to bring online in 19H1 is, or this next release, is the ability for people with WSUS and SCCM devices to be able to pull down the whip slow build and validate the whip slow build through WSUS. So we're going to try to get a little more feedback relative to the enterprise experience as well as the end user consumer experience.
And it all goes back to your previous slide, right? We want the user experience in that ring, in the slow ring, to be at a point where they're not losing productivity. And that's super important for our enterprise customers.
So Brandon mentioned earlier that we had 7 whip slow builds
For RS4.
For RS4
Yeah.
in 6 months. Correct? RS4 is basically 6 months. So
Pretty much.
so we hit our goal of once a month. Although, just like Russell Wilson's performance last night, if you look at the statistics, they don't reflect the game. We had a few go at the end more than at the beginning, which we're going to work on. Like Josh mentioned, we're going to work on it. And our still goal is that we're going to try to be able to have once a month between now and the release of the next upgrade. But we're going to continue to try to get on this very stable, consistent once a month whip slow.
And we've had 5 for RS5s, and we've actually, since July, have actually had one slow build.
So we've hit that monthly cadence,
So
which
July,
was kind of like
August,
that base
now
bar
September,
that.
we are now in that.
Yeah.
We're kind of getting into that rhythm now.
Yeah.
You can see that.
Yeah, I mean that's something we actually talked about publicly a little bit, right? Was we're servicing. We actually talked about the fact that we were servicing builds, where it was like, hey, we know it's been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, almost a month before a slow got a build. So we'll pull a build, right, that has a bug or two in it that's capable of being serviced, that didn't affect the servicing stack like Joel explained earlier, make the actual fix for it, get that package, drop it together with that build, and then
say
ship
package it did.
Hey man, whatever. It gets packaged, thank you Brandon, and then sent down so that we can actually hit that cycle for getting builds to slow. And of course, we've got nowhere to go but up, right? Since we're actually working that muscle of using servicing, getting builds to slow more frequently, right? Hopefully, I mentioned earlier about trying to get to slow every other week instead of just potentially once a month. Hopefully we kind of hit this rhythm where we get like this well-oiled machine and we can get those builds out even faster.
Well, and I also think it's worth calling out that we kind of announced at Build, I think it was April, that we were doing this.
Yep.
And it took us a little bit of time to get into this rhythm, but we discovered in the process of doing several test runs up until July, we actually discovered a lot of good bugs in our servicing mechanisms and engineering systems that we ended up fixing, and so that's why there was kind of that delay between what we said at Build and when we finally got into that rhythm, which in itself I think that could be probably a topic.
It's funny because Joel mentioned, is there a problem with the actual servicing stack, right?
Yeah.
So there's the servicing stack that affects the machines and actually getting builds to machines. And then there's the entire machinery behind the scenes that creates all of this, right? And so as we began to work through some of that, we're like, oh, hey, this should be different. This needs to be optimized. This doesn't work as expected. So we get to fix the machine that's creating the stuff that actually goes out to users. So it's this entire full process. So we're getting better all around for every time we try.
And I think we overlook this a lot. You have a cultural shift that happens here at this company that tends to be the ball rolls a little slower and then it starts to pick up speed as soon as people start to see value in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And when we sort of set off on this adventure of servicing slow, I feel like in my position it was a little bit of with the big stick, right? Like, I need you to get the fixes in so we can send this build out to slow. But they'll just get the next slow build. No, that's not how this works nowadays.
Yeah.
And now we're at this point where we're able to come and show, hey, we're fixing these issues, we're identifying these things, we're getting builds out on a monthly cadence. This is all great stuff. And now we've got that culture shift happening of people coming to us and saying, hey, can we get this into the slow servicing thing you guys are doing? Like, we think that would be great. It's not me having to go out and sort of...
Would you please fix this, right?
Please, yeah. So it's been really interesting to see that shift, and it happened, in my perspective, relatively quickly for such a large company.
Yeah.
It's a good segue into kind of the next slide that we're talking about, which is we tried to figure out where the customer value is relative to rings and areas and people. And so Josh was just referring to this Flight Like We Service, which not only is it super excited to see people come to us with the opportunity to service, it's, hey, we can do it. Like, I don't have to, like, my biggest fear is somebody's going to say, hey, I want to go deliver a fix, and I'm not going to be able to actually deliver the fix because the tools aren't ready, or it's going to take a week or 2 weeks, and it's just faster to go blow it out. One of the pieces that I want to highlight here is that the server, this release was a big release for the server team, and our whip slow audience and the infrastructure behind it, this Flight Like We Service concept, enabled us to be able to support the server releases. And servers, one of server's biggest customers is Office 365, and we were able to take the slow builds and be able to deliver servicing updates to them. And that was a big win this release. We're going to see next release, can we drive it into enterprise? Can we get a big win in enterprise? Can we be able to deliver kind of a whip slow for business or something to that effect?
Sure.
Where the enterprise channel, and this by being the enterprise channel, I'm talking about people with WSUS servers, people with SCCM, to be able to pull it down and create groups and manage small communities within their within their environment, be able to validate.
Yeah.
And we get feedback there. One of the things that we talk about here in the second column is there's no more last minute gauntlet surprises. Literally every release we set up this huge matrix. We, the servicing team, what do you say?
Speaking I was waiting for this. I was waiting
surprises.
for this. I knew it was going to happen. As soon as Joel said gauntlet, I was like, Brandon's grabbing it. And all of a sudden I see him start to reach under the table.
Now can you snap?
Like, my arm's not disappearing, though. You have all the Infinity Stones and my arm's not melting, sir.
No, because
that thing.
Yeah.
That guy who works downstairs, Gauntlet.
Yeah,
Yep.
the Thanos guy.
So
Sorry, Joel.
we run a gauntlet.
you said gauntlet.
It's about as exciting as Brandon's.
Deadly, hopefully.
So we literally have this big matrix of all possible scenarios. For example, a user's on RS1 coming up to RS5. They've updated through setup. How do we make sure that we give them a seamless experience? They're on just as opposed to just RS4. So in the flighting world, whip fast is effectively RS5 to RS5.
Yep.
Version 1 of RS5 to version 2 of RS5. And it's a very plain vanilla feature update. And by design, what that allows us to do is isolate. There's very little change generated by which composition we use. And so it allows us to isolate the payload itself.
Okay.
Are the fixes getting on the device? And you don't have a problem where, hey, because we're coming through RS1 and we have all these different configurations, we're able to test it. The other thing that it allows us to do is, in recent releases, we added ARM64 devices.
Yeah.
How are we ready to service ARM64? We added Oasis or Windows HoloLens, but the third-party versions of those. And so how do we validate, scenarios where, hey, you take the update, you plug in the device, then do we have to take another update? Can we break it? So all these different scenarios are what we run through Gauntlet. And by enabling whip slow with this flight like we service, we were able to validate a lot of these scenarios way earlier in the process.
Yeah.
Because we could go add machines from, for example, RS1 and take the update from RS1 to RS5. The other piece is, because whip fast is feature update to feature update, and the majority of devices have feature update, quality update, languages, features on demand. They have all these different components, and we usually you don't take people from a feature update to a feature update. Matter of fact, pretty much the only people that go feature update to feature update are insiders. The rest of the world has all this stuff going to all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we do all sorts of optimizations. So, for example, if you wait till 3 months into a release for RS5, you're taking a payload from, let's just say you're keeping up to date, RS4 1B, January, to RS5 1B. Well, we do a lot of smart things around optimizing the payload size. So you're taking, like, we have express packages and stuff, and what we've done is optimized even further so we can validate that within the concept of whip slow.
Wow.
And so that's some of the things that we do and some of the ways we do it. And that's actually my segue into my colleague, Malia, who I want to preface with, I didn't tell her until today that this was a video webcast.
So it's a webcast, and there's actual video going to be happening.
Yes.
So before you transition, what I think is really interesting is, I don't know how many insiders remember, but Joel announced this at Build. And that was not that long ago. Right? He came on stage at Build, we pointed at him dramatically, he said, whip slow is going to be serviced, it's going to be even safer for enterprises and devs. And now there's already been how many service builds out? Right? That's pretty cool that between Build and Ignite, not only has the team really run around and rebuilt the servicing pipeline, but we've gotten builds out to companies. So at Ignite next week, we're going to drill home to companies. Now's really the time.
They can't hear you.
They can't.
They can't hear you.
Can you?
So you're gonna have to come up. Yeah.
Sneak over, Donna.
Sneak over. Okay, now Joel's leaving. Okay, so for insiders, Joel announced this at Build, at our Build session on Whip for Business and Whip for Devs back in June. And it was, kind of an interesting announcement then, like, hey, WhipSlow is going to be serviced. It's going to be a safer and better build for companies as well as devs. And now that it's been out, it's been tested, not only the servicing pipeline, but the builds itself. We're going to talk about this a lot at Ignite. Like, dear companies, those of you who've been holding off for, years and months because these builds are not serviced, this is the time to actually make it happen. So you'll hear us talk about this over and over in Jason's session, in my session, in my other session, about why WhipSlow is the build for organizations and businesses. Yeah. And we'll talk a lot about these case studies of bugs that we have found and fixed in the past few months. And those are bugs that would have gotten out to companies, and companies would have been pretty upset. But now we're able to catch them in real time and set the bar really, really high. So all of you insiders on the call, tell everyone you know, if you work in a company, you want to run insider builds, use WhipSlow. WhipSlow is your friend. Our goal is that every organization that runs Windows has insider builds in 1%. So 1% of your company's builds should be insider, because that way you know what's coming next.
Yeah.
You're not going to be surprised. You're not surprised that your line of business apps fail. You're not surprised at, oh wow, look, did you know about this cool new thing in Windows Defender? So tell everyone you know. We're going to tell everyone. You'll see a lot of news about it next week, along with a very exciting new program for specifically people who work in organizations and companies. So sorry to crash, but we wanted to tell this webcast audience before we tell everyone else.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the RS5 quality updates and how we utilize. Okay.
I'm just gonna move the mic to you.
There you go. Yeah. So RS5 quality updates and how we utilized build servicing or flight servicing, or flight as we service. We have various names for that. To validate and stabilize the changes that we are bringing. So, all right. We did a blog post on this back in August, I think August 16, 2018.
Is that first link?
Yes, that is the first link. About what's next for Windows 10 and Windows Server quality updates. To recap, as most of the audience probably knows, that Windows 10 quality updates accumulated, meaning that every month all the fixes since RTM are included in the update package, and that makes that model actually comes with a challenge that.
Sorry.
You okay? That the size of the updates, the monthly updates, can grow large over the time.
Yep.
So. In the past, we have addressed that problem using the express updates, express downloads for the quality updates, as well as Delta updates. What happened here? Did I lose the slide?
Oh, that's Jen doing stuff.
No, that's Jen.
Okay.
This is where you're at. You're good.
Okay. So, but for quality updates for RS5, or the next version of major version of Windows 10 and Windows Server, we'll be doing a single compact quality update package type, which will be built using a compression technique, which renders the size of the update package much smaller than that of the full update and Delta update, and it's comparable to the Express update. It will be available via all existing channels that we published the update packages today, which is Windows Update. So all the devices that are directly connected to Windows Update will seamlessly download that new quality update package. It will also be available for download on as a standalone installer on Microsoft Update Catalog, and it will also be available it will also be published to WSUS. And it will be supported by all existing management and deployment tools that Microsoft has today. All supported versions of WSUS will be able to install that. Config Manager 1806 will support it. Windows image servicing and management, which is the DISM tool that mostly the OEMs and enterprises use to site load or add the package to the Windows image. That will support it as well as Windows Update Agent COM APIs that some third-party management solutions use to search for updates, download updates, and install the updates. They will all support this new update type. So Going to the next slide. Are we on this next one? I can't see it.
there.
Okay. So, so when we compare it to the older three different types of quality updates that we used to do for the down-level supported versions of Windows 10, you can see that the download size is much smaller as compared to the full quality updates and Delta quality updates. But it's for Express, though, even though if you look at the scenario where you're getting monthly updates, quality updates from month to month, Express does offer the minimum amount of bits that are downloaded to your device, although that is only for the monthly quality updates. There are certain other scenarios where the quality updates are applicable to your machine. For instance, when you bring down a feature update, you also bring down the latest quality update for that feature update. And if Express is enabled, which it is by default for all the devices that are connected to Windows Update, it will actually bring down the full quality update today. As for the new changes for RS5 quality updates, it will always be a smaller payload, no matter what scenario the Windows quality update is applicable in.
Wow.
So, other than that, a couple of other benefits as compared to Express is that it is applicable to all baselines. So, regardless of where the device is coming from, whether it got the quality update from last month or the last time it got the quality updates was like 6 months ago or whenever, it will always be able to bring the device up to date. And also it is 40% less, uses less memory or device resources when the device is actually downloading and installing the update, so making the update experience for the users more seamless. So Express had a little challenge in that area.
And there's actually a point I want to make here.
Yeah.
And Josh had to step out. He's gone to another meeting, but to celebrate something that Josh and I had worked through previously was for any old school devices, right? So users that were running insider builds that were old school RS1, TH2, TH1 even. We're talking old stuff from 3+ years ago. At one point in time, we were still trying to build stuff to bring people up to date. So if they fired up a machine that they hadn't used in a couple of years and it went and scanned for insider updates, it would help them jump up to more recent builds. Just from this very tiny number of folks that fall into that bucket, we actually ended that process so that if you were on RS1, you weren't going to be offered an RS4 build or now an RS5 build, right? But it sounds like potentially that this could re-enable some of that so that we don't have to say, get an ISO, reinstall on your machine, go through this process where, I back my stuff up, but hey, if I go reimage my machine, I'm just assuming there's going to be something I'm going to lose. That's just me. I'm one individual, right? I take responsibility for that. But there's always that inherent risk of, did I back this up? Like, for those of you out there that are photographers, I reimaged a machine once and forgot to back up my Lightroom catalog. 2 years worth of work gone. So there was no undoing it. So I know the process painfully, right? Yeah. And if we can, anything that's happening, which it sounds like there's a lot of awesome stuff happening that can help eliminate that for users, especially those who are trying to play catch up, so to speak, and get on new builds.
Yeah.
The work you're doing is fantastic to help people like me. Like, I'm going to raise my hand and put myself in that bucket.
That's cool. All right. So other than the devices, this new update actually also helps the enterprise managed devices as well. So for enterprise managed devices, which typically use WSUS or SCCM or a third-party management solution today, they can't use Express download for quality updates, but in order to make use of Express, they have to download and cache the large PSF or the patch storage files or Express download files to the distribution points in the update server. And these are typically at least 3 times as large as the full update size. And for the new type of the RS5 quality updates, the same package that gets downloaded to the individual devices is all that needs to be downloaded and cached on the distribution points of the update servers. And the management of the redistribution of these devices becomes very, of these updates becomes very simple as well. So going back to, so in order to enable this type of updates, to bring this feature to RS5, there were significant changes that needed to be made to the packaging infrastructure, as well as fundamental changes on the Windows 10 servicing stack. And validating and stabilizing those changes is a big deal. And we leveraged the flight servicing, specifically the promotion to the slow ring, to test to validate and stabilize our changes. So the way, as Joel and Josh already kind of covered, that the build that goes out, a preview, a build that goes out to Windows Insider, a fast ring. For each of those, we accumulate all the slow blocking bugs, and then we use the RS5 packaging systems to produce these new packages, and then we publish them first to Canary, then self-host, and then to Microsoft, and eventually to Windows Insider Slow. Okay. And then we rinse and repeat until we are ready to ship RS5 and service it.
And just for reference, like this Canary and self-host is almost like it's a mirror of like the mainline stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Where when we talk about, we're releasing to Canary and self-host and fast and slow, right? Like on the servicing side, there is a Canary ring and a self-host ring, right? It kind of runs in parallel. There's complete user bases, people testing this on their production work machines, right? It's not like, it is by no means some sort of a, like a second tier type system. It's fully validated, fully tested, making sure that it's ready to go before it jumps from ring to ring.
And if you'd like to learn more about the RS5 quality updates, there are a few references here. We did do a blog post, as I mentioned earlier, and then there's a link to the supported versions of WSUS and the support for Windows 10 and Configuration Manager. It refers to the support metrics for SCCM. And we will be having some Ignite sessions. Our team will be there. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask here or in that forum.
Yep. Yep. And just for those of you that are tuned in, right, I'm going to take a moment here, and I'm actually sharing each link that is on this page. I'm sharing it here directly in chat, so that you can go ahead and pull it up directly if you would like, or for those of you, well, if you're not watching this real time and you're watching this later, I wanted to make sure you have these links handy to you. So link 3, and then the 4th link on the page is coming right now. So let me grab it, and this is link 4. There you go.
Next.
So now in the chat, you've seen those are the 4 links.
Do you know who's that robot?
Yep.
Okay.
So the last piece of this update that I wanted to talk about was, last piece I wanted to talk about relative to Flighting Like We Service is this concept of rollout. I mentioned earlier we talk about machine learning and the ability to roll out an update. We've spent a lot of times in the last 2, 3, 4 releases to be able to optimize the rollout so that the devices that can take it get exposed to the rollout first, and then once we feel successfully enabling them to take the rollout, we enable it and go faster. So this allows us to validate the rollout, and we're going to do that with a release here pretty soon. What we'll do is take a final release candidate, and we're going to roll out through this schedule. Let me preface everything with, as a user, if you go in and check for updates, you will override any rollout that we have. This is this concept that we call seeker. So if you, as a user, choose to update your device and go and check for updates, you will override whatever any other rollout criteria we have in place. So we're going to validate that the seeker works. We're going to validate some of the throttling methods, and what we do here is we're going to do based on languages and locales. So we'll throttle a particular, in this particular case, we're going to use anybody in Spanish, MX is Mexico, ES is Spanish and Mexico. So anybody with language, Mexican Spanish, we're gonna throttle them. Did I say it wrong?
No, you're good.
And then we're also gonna go based on locale. So if you're in Canada on a French locale, so we're going to do a little bit of throttling there, and then country, so Brazil. And this will all happen in the first 3 days. And the idea is, if you think of a Venn diagram, we're going to roll these all on top of each other. So the expectation is the majority of people will get it, but we'll see which way they get it, which attributes are used, and make sure that the appropriate attributes hit the appropriate devices.
And this is just example, like it's like this isn't a plan of how we're rolling out RS5, right? Like the concept will happen, but like just by country and all that, like these are just examples just to talk through.
Yeah, that'll be very crystal clear. This is not how we roll it out. This is us validating. What we did is we took the matrix of attributes that we could use in a rollout, and then we took subsets of them to be able to validate that we could use all the particular attributes and variables, and we could effectively spin the dials so that we could manage it. So that's our purpose of this rollout. It will not be rolled out this way, and the rollout test is not indicative of how we do rollout. So, but it is a great thing, and I wanted to talk about the last thing on here is I referenced the blog.
Yeah, let me grab the link.
That talks about how we use machine learning to manage the rollout. That is the way that we do the majority of the rollout. Is we use machine learning to be able to drive that and build the audiences and deliver based on that.
And that link right there is the link where it says on the PowerPoint this Windows blog. I just linked to it in the chat. So again, you can go ahead and click on it there. And if you're watching this kind of, as a VOD later on, you'll have that there to reference as well.
Yeah. So that was my last slide.
Okay. All right, you want to throw me the clicker?
Yes.
Jen, can I have my seat back? Jen totally hijacked my chair. So let's see here. What do we got? You know what? It's time for Q&A. I love bringing up this slide. This is one of my favorite ones because it's like different from the Ninja Cat ones. Like I love Ninja Cat. This was just one of the creative ones that was done.
So somebody just actually went up and asked they wished Seeker could have functionality to detect space. That is that's a wonderful idea. We're looking at some of the ideas that I'm going to tell you this is all aspirational. I don't know what we're actually going to get in or what's not going to get in, but this concept of being able to use Seeker and see what you have available to you before you actually are forced to take it is something that we're looking into in the future release.
And just for clarity on the term, right? Because I know there's some people who haven't heard. Seeker is
the user. If a user goes and hits check for updates, that means you're a seeker.
You're seeking.
You're actually looking to say, is there something available for my machine instead of the periodically scheduled machine scan saying, oh, is there something new that should be brought down?
You've triggered the scan to say, hey, come back in there. Yeah.
Pretty much every insider out there is a seeker because, well, insiders like to click that button, it seems.
So, but some of the things that we're looking at is, hey, you go check the seeker button.
Brandon.
Some of the things that we're looking at is if you go check the seeker button, it'll say, okay, you have the following updates available to you. Do you want to take them?
Yeah.
Do you like the other situation is your device? What could your device take? What do you want? There's all sorts of scenarios where we're thinking this through.
Okay. What other questions have? I will say, since I'm serving dual role because Joe was not here today, I have not been tallying all the questions that have come in. Has anybody captured any awesome questions that we should tackle?
So there is a question here that says, a current KB article states that Woo doesn't check the free space before initializing. True? If so, why? Which is true.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So there's a KB article that says Woo doesn't current current KB article states that Woo doesn't check free space before initializing. True? If so, why?
I'm not sure. I don't
I'm not. I'd love to go look at the article and see what it's in context of. The download agent should validate that there's enough free space to download an update.
But to install, it won't.
But to it's kind of like an IP connection. One goes to the next, to the next, to the next. You don't know what the whole sequence is going down. So it could be in reference to, and I'm speaking a little bit from long-term memory here, is that
That sounds right.
yeah.
So this is definitely, of course, true. But the flip side to that is that in RS5 we did do some major changes to storage sense, where you can let the OS help manage your space on your PC, and if you get to a point where the PC is running low to do Windows updates, it's actually powered by AI and smart enough to delete things like temporary files for you, so that way it can actually install and download and install your updates.
Yeah, because it'll downloaded files if you want it to, temporary internet files, your delivery
Recycle bin.
optimization cache, your recycle bin. If you have more than one Windows.old folder, the old installations, it will save the most recent one, so you have something to roll back to, but it can, free up the space of the other ones that were there.
A lot of the capabilities of Storage Sense are now adopting the whole the disk cleanup tool, which will eventually be deprecated. A lot of the capabilities are being built into that. So doesn't really answer the question on why Woo doesn't. We have to go look into that. But on the OS side, we've done some improvements to make sure that devices with low storage space can be a little bit more functional in terms of getting updates.
Another good question: recovery options when servicing. What drives the actual options? Star Zooft, if I'm saying that correctly. I'm going to assume it's, hey, if I take a service update to a build and my machine doesn't like it, can I roll back from it? If that's not right, please correct me here. Rolling back versus fixing options. Yeah, so rolling back, you roll back off a servicing update the same way. You just say, hey, go to my previous.
Actually, a quality update is not rolled back the same way as a feature update.
Okay, I'm stuck in insider build, so tell me.
Quality update, you actually go to settings and you go to history or advanced.
Windows update history.
And you find
Windows
the KB
update
article.
history. No, and you actually you can uninstall updates.
Okay.
And then what it'll do is it'll bring up the old Windows dialog, and you check the KBs and you remove the KBs.
Okay.
So it's actually much easier to uninstall, UI notwithstanding.
Sure.
It's much easier to uninstall a quality update
than it is to roll back a Windows installation. Yeah.
Yes. Matter of fact, I'll do that a lot of times, all the times when I have machines, because I'll take, we'll do multiple quality updates when we're spinning them, and I'll take it, and then I'll uninstall it, and then take the next one. Because I want to get the experience from what the insiders are at.
As you keep doing package revs along the way. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It shows you how long it's been since I've actually had to uninstall something. That's the joy of being on the insider builds. Let's see what else. It was asking Q&A. I didn't want to mix regions. Questions about storage sense. What is the story with the changes made? Don't know the answer. The Macrium thing, I'm not sure of. So good question in the chat, but that's not something I'm gonna have to go research that. Let's see here. Installing updates and installing. So uninstalling the updates and installing the latest helps with space. No, it doesn't work like that. Arcadian, not. You don't need to uninstall updates to install a latest update. The OS is the OS. So after it's taken, whatever fixes have come down, The OS footprint in general will stay approximately the same size. It might grow or shrink just a tiny bit. So really where you need to save space at isn't so much with the size of the OS that's currently installed. One of our longer term goals is try to reduce the footprint of the OS on the whole. But it's other ancillary files that are on the machine. So if you're like on a low disk space device and you have 100 gigs of music, well, you can't even have that much, but a significant amount of music or movies or something, it's potentially advisable to try to put them on an external hard drive or a secondary drive depending on your machine type. If you have numerous Windows.old folders, so you have several old installations that obviously you're not using at that point, you can delete those to save space on the drive. It's really about saving space on the drive so that the next big major, like the next feature update, right? So the next semi-annual release when it comes out, that it can install on the drive itself. Does the team know if the issue from the past months where a new build would download, install, and then restart it would stay on the current build? That is one of those things that happens on individual machines. It was not endemic to any particular build or a specific bug that was identified. There were some changes that were made. It's not something that's been reported with great frequency. I actually haven't seen any instances of this in the past few installs. So 61, 63, 58. I'm trying to remember all the build numbers offhand. So again, if you're still saying that, of course, file feedback so we can get logs and see what's actually taking place on the machine. But it is not a widespread bug that's affecting a lot of users. Let's see here. Last preview build took 15 minutes to get installed. That's really not bad. I realize it's Sniffy Tundra. That's not as fast. It's slower than you would like, but in the grand scheme of things, especially compared to a year ago, that's actually a lot faster than it used to be. So hopefully, the continued changes, some of what we've discussed here today, and some of what we talked about with the whole Neo thing, hopefully you'll keep seeing improvements along the way. Somebody uses an ISO and then uses disk cleanup. I will say that's a bit risky, right? Deleting the Windows.old folder is always a risk because it immediately takes away your rollback option. So be careful. I know there's a lot of fast insiders and especially skip ahead insiders that love living on the edge. If you absolutely need that, space from the Windows.old folder, you might want to invest in a second hard drive or an external drive of some sort. I'm just making that recommendation, but like I said, if you delete that folder, you do lose the ability to roll back to your previous build. So if you get stuck, your only option is either take another ISO and update from there, or potentially just wipe and reinstall your machine. So be super careful. I'm not telling you not to do it if that's really where your heart's set, but just be careful doing that. Any plans to allow us to target Windows.old or temp Windows update download to another drive? Oh.
It's a good suggestion.
That's actually a great suggestion. Like, to save space on the main drive, when you do an update, let it copy it or just outright move Windows.old to a secondary drive. That is an interesting suggestion. Like, it would take a rollback longer because it would have to pull it from drive to drive and then unpack it.
That's a good idea. So
you might actually run into some space constraints. So there's a lot to think about there, but that's actually a really good suggestion. Throw it in the feedback hub and send me a link.
Yep.
Wow. This is why I love insiders. Y'all always come up with these awesome questions to get us thinking. I'll take a couple more. I know we're already a little bit over time. I apologize for keeping you. If I can ask a couple more here real quick. Why does Windows Update stay so long at 100% downloading before it actually starts installing the new build? Tourniquet, there's any number of reasons. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to go through all of them. It could be related to the internet connection. It could be downloading the last big file. It could be starting an unpack and just have not switched on the screen to show you that. There's too much for me to go through here. If we end up doing another deployment webcast, which I'm talking to the team to talk about, like this whole Neo thing that we've mentioned a few times, I would love to get them back in here. So if I can do that, then that'd actually be something we could address in that webcast. Are restore points still recommended procedure? I mean, we have the whole. I mean, it still happens, and we still have the whole rollback option. To be honest, I don't even remember the last time I used a restore point. Like, it's honestly probably been 4 years, 5 years since I've had to use a restore point. Like, I think the OS has gotten resilient enough to isolate specific problems that I haven't had to roll back the entire OS. I mean, if it's part of your habits, there's no reason not to, as long as you have the drive space. But but you don't need to keep 10 or 20 restore points like may have been advisable back in, I don't know, XP days or potentially up into Windows 7. It's not, I would say it's not a commonly recommended practice any longer from what I see. But then again, you know, it may be specific to your organization or your own process, whatever you may be doing, whatever you prefer. All right. Would system restore work with weekly builds? No, because once you're on a new build, your old system restore points become invalid because your OS has changed because you've jumped from build to build. So it's not going to roll you back like that. It would. That's what the Windows.old folder is for, is to bring you back to your previous build. All right, so I will tag some more questions. I will keep chat open here, even though we're going to go ahead and wrap up the stream. Malia, Joel, I would say Josh, but you know he had to duck out. Thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been a whole lot of fun. I have always, as every webcast, I've learned a ton. I've seen tons of comments just in the chat of between this being interesting, learning stuff people didn't know about, all the blog links that were shared, things that we've published externally. Take a moment and read through those. Hopefully there's some more interesting tidbits that you can learn along the way. Ping us on Twitter. We're just at Windows Insider. There's answers.microsoft.com. Go find the Windows Insider section, and you can post in there as well. Yeah, but as always, thank you. And then Ignite next week.
Ignite.
We will be doing a webcast. I'm telling y'all because this is the first I've actually said it, I think. We'll be doing a webcast from Ignite next Thursday, which is 28th, so 27th. I'm trying to do math on the fly. Oh, yeah, so we're going to live stream our sessions too. So you get to see Donna, you get to see me, you get to see Vivek. I may even drag Brandon on stage just so he can swing his gauntlet around. Don't bring that, please.
Don't bring that.
They're going to throw him out. Anyway, I will post up the time for, I think it's at 11 a.m. Eastern, which would be 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central. Anyway, I'll get it posted up so you know. And then in the newsletter for next month, we'll have the October webcast date and time posted in there as well. So stay tuned for that. So again, thank you all for attending. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you learned something. Until next week, we are signing out. Cheers, everybody.